This episode of the ABIC podcast is brought to you by the Electrology Education Coalition. Hello and welcome to the ABIC podcast, your online support community for the aesthetic and beauty industry. Here, we're strengthening and unifying the industry through representation, innovation, and education. This is a platform created and dedicated to the aesthetic and beauty industry, valuing unity and advancement. We serve to represent, support, and inspire you by connecting you with industry experts, expanding your knowledge through educational pieces, and bringing you the latest industry news. This is the ABIC podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie Miller, and today on the ABIC podcast, we're joined by Joanie Gonella, CPE, a globally respected electrology educator with over 20 years of clinical experience. Joanie is a certified professional electrologist, co-owner of the California Electrology Academy, and co-founder of the Electrology Education Coalition. As an international speaker and educator, her work is centered on strengthening foundational education, supporting ongoing professional development, and helping elevate standards across the electrology profession worldwide. In this episode, we explore why strong core training matters more than ever, how education must evolve alongside technology and client expectations, and what practitioners can do to remain skilled, ethical, and confident throughout their careers. Welcome, Joanie. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Really, really good. I'm very, very pumped to speak to you today. We have here, for those of you that don't know, one of the world's, I suppose, master trainers in electrology and really a specialist and an expert. So we're very privileged to have you on today. Thank you so much for making time. It's 7 o'clock there, isn't it?
Yes, the time change is a little crazy between Australia and the US, and especially me in California, since I'm all the way on the West Coast. But here we are.
Well, it sounds so glamorous in California. What's the weather like over there?
You know, it's been hot actually, and I know you're in Celsius, and so I don't have the conversion off the top of my head. It's been a while since I've operated in Celsius, but we've had a little bit of a heat wave. So it's in December. It's our winter normally, and we've had temperatures about 85 where I was. I'm in Southern California.
Well, so you don't get the white Christmas. Do you ever get the white Christmas over there?
No, it doesn't snow here.
For those that don't know, please tell us a little bit about yourself, how you came to be in the electrology sector as well, and what your passions are that led you there.
I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, and I feel like my journey has been a little convoluted, so it can be a long story. But essentially, I was actually born in Quebec, Canada, and I lived there until I was about 13, and we immigrated to the US with my parents. And my mom actually has been an electrologist and esthetician since she was 16 years old. And so, yeah, she was an esthetician first and then learned electrology when she was 19, had her own studio with employees by the time she was 21. And so she's always been in the field. She used to teach. And when they wanted to immigrate, they were trying to think about how to get into the US. And one of the things you can do is open a business. And so they opened a distribution business for Dectro International. And that actually brought us here. So we brought Dectro into the US and electrology, just kind of pushing it forward. She actually paved the way. And then when I was 16, 17, since we were immigrants, I didn't have my green card until I was in college, actually. So I couldn't work legally. And my mom, who's always been somebody that had a lot of drive and a lot of energy, just did not like me sitting at home my summers between my schooling to just sit at home and do nothing. And so she asked me one day, do you want to go and learn electrology? And I said, okay. And so I actually moved in with a family friend, and I was 16 and I was going to school all summer. I finished up high school and I was still doing my course. And then by the time I was graduated high school, I still graduated with a trade. So I've been an electrologist since, I started at 16, 17. I pretty much opened my own business kind of doing this, and I've always come back to it. I did go to university. I was going to medical school once upon a time, but I that shifted gears. I actually always kind of came back to this. There's something about the beauty field and electrology that always just kind of had my heart, I think. And so, I came back into it, and then it's just kind of grown ever since. I've had opportunities to travel with Dextro International, training distributors in different countries. And so, I've had experience doing that in trade shows. I've done trade shows in the US and in Canada and Hong Kong and Malaysia. I've done a bunch of different places doing different things for the field. Every facet that you can think of, I've at least attempted, I think, at some point. So now, my focus is very much on the legitimacy of the field and growing the field. So, with my school, and I do have a salon, so I still practice, to this day. So I'm still seeing clients and everything. So it's you got to keep sharp. Yeah, that's kind of what really brought me all the way to where we are today, about to come to Australia
Mm.
to do the seminar. So I'm excited.
We're very excited. I mean, when you speak with such passion about what you do. And they say, you need 10,000 hours to become an expert. I think you've done like 100,000 hours at this
I've
point.
never attempted to, yeah, they say, I think like I once looked it up because I know that book. It was great.
Yeah.
It was like 10,000 hours, 10 years, right? I think it is what it kind of culminated to. So I'm probably two and a half times that now. So that's good.
Yeah, at least, because I mean, when it's your passion, you delve into that and
Yeah.
you specialize and you only do that. I think there's something to be said for mixing practice with passion, and the outcome there is excellence. And surely, I mean, that's the level of that you're at. And master level, if that. And we're very, very excited because we're going to have you speaking at our symposium and really headlining and keynoting at that on the 11th and 12th of January in 2026 in Sydney. But we're going to be talking, everything from foundations to highly advanced topics. And I think it really is such an incredible learning experience for everyone at every stage of their journey in electrology. If you're just starting out, and if you are an advanced, experienced electrolysis, you're going to get such incredible insight into the future of electrology and the most advanced techniques. But if you take it back to the basics, we're also going to be talking about those critical foundations that sometimes are missed in the beginning. And so I wanted to ask you, I think, a really important question because we're about to review our education here in Australia for beauty and beyond. What are the critical foundations you think every electrologist really should get a handle on and master very early in their training and education? And what do you see those missing gaps? How do they show up later on when they're actually practicing with clients?
I mean, for me, it always comes back to the basics. I think that follicle anatomy, knowing about hair growth cycles, about insertion mechanics, the depth of your insertion, tissue response, all of these things, it's just so important, just really understanding how they all piece together.
Mm.
And it's not just memorizing them for an exam. Sometimes early in education, a lot of people learn what to do without fully understanding why. And
Right.
so they might learn a setting, a pattern, the rules of things, but they're not really taught how to interpret what they're seeing on the skin. And so they might be able to go through a treatment, but they don't really have the clinical reasoning to adjust when something doesn't go quite right. So as soon as there's a little nuance of something that isn't responding how they think it should, they're completely stumped. So these gaps, honestly, they don't disappear with time, they just show up differently. So years later, you'll see practitioners that are struggling with overtreatment, that have inconsistent insertions, that see poor healing on the skin, or they just feel like they have to work harder and harder just to get the same results.
Mm.
So often they're just compensating with more current, longer timing, more passes instead of just refining their technique. And almost always we trace it back to the issue that started early. So they're missing those foundational skills those need to be really solid. So strong foundations really give you options. When you understand anatomy, you understand tissue response, then you can adapt. And
Mm.
without that, people tend to rely on habits, and habits really only take you so far.
Right, that's really, really important. You know what? I'm thinking about really almost every modality that we have in therapy, and when you're using devices, sometimes we do rely on habit. I feel like that's a not just an electrology thing; it's a thing across, lasers, IPLs, RF, even the protocols that we follow with peels. We just don't really know how to pivot when you need to pivot. And
Exactly.
learning those foundational the whys, the real science behind what you're doing, I think can help you to make those decisions right in the moment and adjust what you're
Yes.
doing clinically in the moment, which is really needed. I mean, you have different types of patients with different
Yeah.
things that are presenting at the moment that can be completely off script, and it's so important to get that training. Electrology is described sometimes, and I could be wrong, as a simple type of modality, but the more I'm learning about it, I'm realizing that actually the clinical skill required, it's significant. It's quite
Yes.
intense because it's very user dependent, right? What are some of the misconceptions about electrology and education that really are today you think could undermine those professional standards that we're striving so hard to reach?
I mean, you kind of nailed it there. The biggest misconception is that it's simple. People watch a video of a professional on YouTube and they go, how hard can it be? Right? So it sounds simple and you're removing a hair, but the execution is anything but. Honestly, we're working with live tissue, with electricity. So we have to take into account skin healing and human variability all at the same time. So there's so many different things, micro decisions that we make during treatment that really gives us the results that we're looking for. And these are things that a professional does without thinking, right? And so it's not that easy to translate. Another misconception is thinking that licensure certification means mastery. So initial education is really about minimum competency. And it gives you the tools to start safely, which is very important, but it doesn't really help you to handle every situation confidently. When an industry treats like a basic qualification as the finish line, then it lowers the expectations around precision documentation, ethics, and continued learning.
Right.
I also think there's a misconception about experience, and that experience alone just guarantees skill. Just because somebody's got 20 or 30 years of experience, it doesn't mean that they're super skilled at what they do. Experience matters, don't get me wrong, but experience without reflection, without updating your education, can really reinforce inefficient or outdated practices.
Mm.
And that's how standards end up eroding. I've always done it this way, so why do I need to change it? It really replaces any kind of critical thinking. So
Mm.
electrology deserves to be seen as a skilled clinical profession. That means that you respect the complexity of the work and you recognize that strong education, it doesn't end at graduation. Actually, you're just starting. So it's something that we build on throughout our careers.
I love that. I love that you put that so succinctly. Education doesn't end at graduation. And if we could say that again over and over to all the therapists that have graduated, I just came from an incredible graduation ceremony. One of our foundation members that's an education partner of ABIC, Ellie Lucas, and there was hundreds and hundreds of wonderful graduates and they did exceptionally well. And I was looking at them thinking they have just begun the journey of
Mm-hmm.
learning and education in their career. Technology is evolving fast, right? Treatment
Yes,
environments are evolving. Client expectations are changing. That our clients are so much more educated because we've got the internet, we've got ChatGPT,
exactly.
we've got all of these wonderful information sources. So a client will walk in more educated sometimes than or more
Too
informed, I would
educated.
say. Yes, than the therapist. I mean, they are on with trends, and
Yes.
so I feel that our expectations as therapists or electrologists need to shift to say, okay, we need to go beyond that initial qualification. Tell us a little bit about how you see that ongoing education evolving and where you think it should be.
I mean, I think that continuing education needs a bit of a mindset shift. It's not about fixing something that's broken or chasing the newest trend. It's really about staying aligned with the work that you're actually doing today. So you kind of touched on that, right? Things are changing and you have to change with it. I think that that's important. Clients that we're seeing now are different. So technologies change, machines evolve all the time. Treatment environments are more professionalized. Expectations around comfort, communication, outcomes are higher than they used to be. Again, because people come in educated. They know what they should be looking for and how things should be because now they can read about it online. Where before it could have just been maybe a friend told you about it, and that's the extent of what you understood about electrology, for example. So the question really becomes, does my original training still fully support the clients that are sitting in my chair now? And continuing education is how you recalibrate. It helps you refine technique. It sharpens your decision making. It helps you adapt when things don't go as planned. So it's also where you learn nuances. So the stuff that doesn't always show up on entry level clients. I mean, I have a school, and I know from experience that the models that the students see in the classroom will be slightly different than the models that you see in real life. One of those is just because you'll be able to actually follow a case from the beginning all the way to the end, which at school you don't really do that. And so there's so many different things that you'll encounter when you're actually out in the field that now it brings up questions. And you have to have a place to bring these questions if you want to grow, right? It's important to be intentional about what kind of education you seek out. So not every course needs to be advanced or technical. Sometimes the most valuable learning is around communication, documentation, ergonomics, business boundaries. And so all those will impact treatment quality and practitioner longevity. Ongoing education is about confidence and sustainability. When you keep learning, you're less likely to rely on habits just because it's familiar, just because it feels safe. You have to stay curious, adaptable, engaged, and that's really what allows people to grow in the profession instead of being left behind.
I love that. Learning, when I'm listening to you, I'm thinking to myself, in my experience, learning is never exactly linear. You can learn, right? And you can understand and you can, I suppose, intellectualize a lot of things. But really those growth moments, those big, huge aha moments that shift your career, they happen sometimes not in a linear way. Sometimes things happen that really expand your passion or expand your learning. In those moments, do you think it's advanced training that does it, or do you think it's maybe, exposure to complications or mentoring or big events? Like sometimes going to a symposium like we're talking about now can really shift you to the next level. In your experience as an educator, what do you think lends itself to those big growth moments in your career?
I definitely think that somebody has to have enough curiosity to seek these things out. I know for myself that anytime I leave a symposium, I leave energized because there are things that people talk about and there are topics that are discussed. And like, sure, like I've sat on, I don't know how many PCOS lectures, but every time I go, I learn something new and you leave with just a little bit more knowledge on the topic and the energy that's around these places just kind of, it makes you want to drive forward.
The Electrology Education Coalition is a global initiative dedicated to protecting, advancing, and strengthening the future of electrology. By supporting high education standards, ethical practice, and professional recognition, the Electrology Coalition brings educators, practitioners, and industry leaders together with a shared purpose. If you're passionate about preserving the integrity of electrology and supporting its next generation, learn more at www.electrologycoalition.com. proud sponsors of the ABIC Electrology Symposium.
But sometimes, the biggest moments of growth tend to happen because somebody feels like something's just off. Something feels off. So that could be maybe you feel like you're at a plateau. Maybe the practitioner realizes that they're working harder, but they're not getting better outcomes. So something's just not clicking. Sometimes it's maybe a client reaction, something that you didn't expect. I tend to get a lot of those for Electrolysis Unplugged. People will send in like, this is what happened. And so then we discuss it, so you have to have kind of that moment that says, something isn't quite right. So hopefully you're able to deduce that and then seek out, help in this case. So and sometimes it could be, physical, like pain or fatigue or burnouts. So there's got to be a force that forces someone to stop and reassess how they're working. So advanced training really can absolutely help, but it's often not the training itself that triggers growth, it's your readiness for it.
Right.
So, a seminar is not going to help somebody that's not willing to take in the information and do something with it. So no matter where you're at, along in your career, so new or within the first couple of years, like you've been doing this for 20, 30 years, there's got to be an open-mindedness when you enter these spaces, just to make sure that, you're actually receptive to what's going on around you. I'm not saying everything that everyone says is the absolute truth and you should, take that back and change everything that you're doing. But it's about being open enough to be able to see a different way of thinking, to see if this is something that you could then internalize and make into something in your own business. So, we go to these seminars and it's great. People are definitely seeking deeper education, but sometimes also mentorship can play a huge role. So someone can look at your work and say, here's what I see. So it's not failure, it's feedback, right? I tended to have this with my mom. So I always kind of said, my mom was always there to be like, oh, you tweezed or you poked and I felt your insertion or whatever it is. And she definitely kept me humble, So it's good to have that. I think it's important. Yeah. Keeps you down to earth. I think it's important to be able to discuss, with colleagues or with mentors about settings and things like that. You want to also stop asking, like, how do I do this? Like one of the questions I hate the most is when somebody comes and so what setting and probe do I use for a chin hair? And that is like the biggest loaded question that you could ask me because there is no one right answer. And so asking something quite that general doesn't work. You have to ask like, what am I seeing and why is the tissue responding this way? Like I need you to understand why the decisions are made. So this is where it definitely kind of changes how people are receptive to mentorship or continuing education.
Oh, I really like that perspective. You're not asking, what do I do? You're asking, what am I seeing? And that delves deeper into, I suppose, the psychology of training and education, because it doesn't just give you knowledge. It actually gives you other things like confidence and the ability to decision make. What do you think training does for a therapist's confidence and belief in themselves and actually the clinical outcomes?
I mean, a strong education really gives you clarity, and clarity can change everything. When you understand what you're doing and why you're doing it, you stop second guessing yourself all the time. You're more confident making adjustments mid-treatment. And sometimes we talked about how you have to shift. There's a lot of micro decisions we're making. So you're also able to explain things to clients and you're able to know when things aren't quite right, so when something's not quite going right. So the confidence really shows up in your decision making. Instead of just increasing your settings when something isn't working right, you start asking better questions. Is my insertion correct? Am I inserting at the right depth? Is this hair really at the right stage? Is the tissue responding appropriately? So those questions will lead to smarter, safer choices in the moment. And it also has a pretty big impact on ethics. When practitioners don't fully understand the treatment, they're likely to overpromise.
Mm,
So telling clients that they can deliver things that they really can't. They'll push through discomfort. This could be in your own body. Maybe you're not positioning correctly and you're ignoring the telltale signs that you really should be doing. There's a better way. You shouldn't be in pain. You keep treating just to get the job done, right? So there's lots of different things. I mean, a strong education will give you the confidence to slow down, to say no, to refer out when something isn't appropriate. And that's really professionalism.
I love that. And we're talking about education and upskilling, but whilst you're speaking, I'm thinking, goodness me, there are lots of habits that we build over time that we don't talk about the theory of unlearning, right? Outdated practices or bad habits that we have. How do you think we can make that, I suppose, a highlight without causing the practitioner to feel judged or defensive as well, and make that a real part of that holistic training and education program?
Yeah, and it's an important conversation because, yes, there's absolutely outdated practices that still persist in the industry. And most of the time, it's not that people are careless or unwilling to grow. And I think that it's important to make that distinction. It's just that they're doing what they were taught. And that worked well enough for a long time. And so sometimes people just don't really see the point in updating and upgrading or unlearning.
Mm,
So a lot of older techniques were passed down as hard rules. Always do it this way, never do it that way. And there often wasn't a lot of explanation behind why, just repetition. So when new information came along, it feels less like education and more like criticism. And that's really not the intention. You want to help people think of it as updating, not correcting. It's about not saying to someone that they're wrong, but that the profession has evolved. We
mm,
know more about skin response, about healing, about client comfort, about infection control, about long-term outcomes than we did years ago. So it doesn't erase the past, it just builds on it. Education can support the shift when it's done with humility and context. So instead of saying, you shouldn't be doing this, right? The conversation becomes more, here's what we're seeing now, and here's why many of us are changing how we approach it. It opens the door without putting anyone on the defensive. It's also, I think, important to normalize that unlearning is uncomfortable. I think
mm.
that nobody likes to be told that what they're doing should be changed. So you gotta, letting go of a technique that you've relied on for years is really destabilizing, especially if it's tied to your confidence and your identity as a practitioner. Good education acknowledges and that concept, and it gives people space to experiment, to ask questions, and to adapt at their own pace. Um, I have a perfection course that I do here in California, and sometimes I have some electrologists that learned a certain way. And it's not that the way that they learned is wrong, but it's that things have evolved over time. And so they're learning a new way. And sometimes it's hard, and I acknowledge this. It's very hard to say that, you've been doing something for 20 years and all of a sudden you have to learn to do it a completely different way. It's difficult. So you have to frame unlearning as professional growth. Um, and then it can become empowering. It reminds practitioners that staying current is not about judgment. We're not judging what you learned and how you learned it or why you learned it that way. It's about caring enough about your clients and your career to keep evolving.
Mm. Oh, that's so wonderful, and it segues into my next thought as well, because next year we are, as I said, reviewing our qualifications and our education, and electrology is going to be a part of that in Australia. I mean, you've had, I would believe that electrology in the US is a little bit more advanced than what we're seeing in Australia. We're lagging behind a little bit. What would you like to see as the biggest educational priorities for the future of this craft of electrology, especially for those coming into the industry and want to have this really long, sustainable but evolving career within electrology?
I think that the biggest priority moving forward is shifting education to beyond just how to treat a hair to how to sustain a career.
Mm.
So we do a decent job teaching people how to pass boards. I mean, we have state boards here in California. Not every state, by the way, is licensed. So there's quite a few states that are a little bit more like Australia is, which is, unlicensed. So technically anybody can buy a machine and start working. So we kind of fight the same battles. It's just that different states will have different requirements. So in California, we do have a state board and they learn the basics, they learn to pass the test, but sometimes we don't always teach them how to still be doing the work 10, 20, or 30 years later. And that usually means more education around clinical decision making, not just technique. So it's about knowing when to push, when to pause, when to change course. It means teaching practitioners how to adapt their approach to clients, to bodies, to life changes. And when we talk more about physical sustainability, we're talking about ergonomics, about positioning, pacing, workload management. These aren't extras. They're really essential to longevity. So if someone is in pain, exhausted, or burnt out, it doesn't really matter how good your technique is. Education has to support the practitioner, not just the procedure. Another big area is business literacy. So pricing, scheduling, boundaries, documentation, communication, they all directly affect longevity. When
Mm.
people undercharge, overbook, feel pressure to say yes to everything because clients will book at 5 in the morning if you let them, burnouts will follow pretty quickly. So education really should help electrologists build practices that are financially and emotionally sustainable, not just busy. And
Mm.
then finally, really look at education or future education needs to support career evolution. So not everyone will or should stay full time in the treatment room forever. I know I'm not one, by the way. Like I would not, I can't do 9 to 5 seeing clients 5 or 6 days a week. It's never been for me, and it's not for me now. But there's teaching, there's mentoring, there's research, there's counseling, there's writing, there's so many valid paths that are still in the field that somebody can go into, and it's really important to normalize those, to show people that there are different opportunities out there, and you can build long careers with when people really are allowed to grow and change within the profession,
Mm.
so then you're not trapped by it.
Yeah, I really love that. You know what? I actually adore that you have your podcast, Unplugged, Electrology
Hmm.
Unplugged. Is that what it's called?
Yes.
It's so cool. I'm sure you've got stories from that podcast that you can share.
Well, we've got like, yeah, we have a lot of episodes. I think we're 2 seasons in, and so there's quite a few episodes. What's the very first episode, for if you're interested, Electrolysis Unplugged, is actually, my brother called it my origin story. So I go a little bit more in depth. Stephanie too. Stephanie Shields is and I kind of co-host. And so we go in through our origin stories, talking about how we came to electrology. And we both had two fairly different paths. So it's fun, but we'd go over case studies, and people will submit questions. And so we'll talk through anything and everything that really somewhat relates to electrolysis. Nothing's off the table.
Oh, everybody who's listening to this must tune in. It is a very, very cool podcast, extremely informative and definitely fun. But you also have courses that you can do online, don't you? Tell us a bit about that.
Yes. So the Electrology Coalition is my business, actually, with Stephanie Shields. We're co-founders, and so the business really has 3 pillars that we kind of stand behind. One is community, which is actually what the mentorship hour, and which became the podcast. So this was about bringing electrologists together. And then we had the education arm, and that's where we do our both webinars and home study courses. So it's all our continuing education. So we're actually about to release the 2026 schedule, but we do live webinars almost every month, every other month or so. And then these courses are recorded, and then we release them as home studies. So for Australians out there, because they're usually at 9 in the morning Pacific Standard Time, it's middle of the night for you, so forget it. But the home studies, you can do that anytime. And so, we have the recording of the seminar, the PowerPoints. We usually have handouts. There's a certificate of completion. And so you have access for a year, so you can rewatch it as often as you want. Um, So there's opportunities for growth for continuing education there. We do have an in-person seminar that we do. That's I host it here in California, and it's in June. Yes, and then our last thing, our last arm is the research. And so that launched actually this year, 2025. We started meeting with some electrologists all over the world, really. And we're trying to, you know, legitimize electrolysis. There just hasn't been up-to-date research in the field since the 90s, really. And so it's nice to see it come back. And so Stephanie and I have really been trying to kind of kick off our research project. And that's another thing. Electrologists from all over the world are going to be invited to join as a study site to be able to start collecting some data. And so that's open to anybody and everybody, everywhere.
Groundbreaking. If you're interested, if you're listening to it and you're interested, how can people get in touch with you?
I think that definitely go and check out the website, electrologycoalition.com, and then we can be reached at info@electrologycoalition.com.
Brilliant. And then finally, tell us a little bit of a snapshot about what we're going to be learning at the symposium. And do you have a workshop afterwards as well?
There's a 2-day workshop, and that's with Tadley. And so I think they're planning quite a action-packed 2 days. There's going to be some hands-on models are going to be coming through. As far as the symposium goes, I have 4 different topics. I'm still working on some of those, but I have actually 2 new talks. They're going to be premiered in Australia. So good or bad, you're going to hear them first.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited about that because I know you travel all around the world to teach about electrology and about, skin and responses and so forth. So I'm really excited to hear, all this wonderful knowledge accumulated by yourself and all the experienced practitioners all around the world as well. We're looking forward to it. I'm rapt that you're coming down. I can't wait to see you. Thank you so much for all the work that you do in this sector and advancing this sector, and also helping Australia to really, advance, elevate, lift our standards and learn more.
I'm excited for the opportunity. So thank you for having me, honestly.
Thank you so much. And thank you for listening, everyone. You've reached the end of another episode of the ABIC podcast, your online support community for the aesthetic and beauty industry. Thank you for listening, and until next time, stay connected.